This close?
Not yet.
Recording. And then I'm going to start webinar.
Okay.
All right, we should be on.
Hello and welcome to those joining us. We're just getting everyone admitted into the room. As you all are coming in, we're very curious to hear, where are you joining us from? So go ahead and put into the chat where in the world you're joining us from. Got Phoenix, Michigan, Columbus, Austin, Texas, Knoxville, Tennessee, another Columbus, San Antonio, Christiansburg, Virginia, Kenosha, Wisconsin, Worthington, Ohio, Lexington, Kentucky, Venice, Florida. We got people from all over the place. All right, Boston, Massachusetts. This is great. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. We're going to give it just one more minute here to get a few more people admitted into the room. And then we will get started. And if you're just joining us, go ahead and put into the chat where you are joining us from. People joining us from all over the country. A lot of warm places, a lot of cold places. Good mix of that too. We're in Jamie and I are in Minnesota, and we got a nice snowstorm yesterday that disrupted a lot of things. Flights and school and driving and all the things. Lancaster, Ohio, welcome. All right, so the next question I have for you, is we just have a couple more, looks like, that are joining us. How many employees do you have in your organization? You can share total number of employees in your organization. That'd be super helpful. 24, 122, 49, 150, 122, 32, 12, 122. Okay, it's kind of a good mix of that. Under 50, perfect. Excellent, thank you. It's kind of a good mix from 10 to 15 up to 200 or so. So good. It's just right in our wheelhouse, right where we work. So that's perfect. 90 to 100. Okay, we're going to get started. I know there'll be a few more attendees joining us as we go. We are recording this, and so we will send this out to anyone who registered, so that they can, if you have coworkers or people, colleagues who weren't able to attend, they will be able to get it, and as will you if you wanted to share it with anyone else. So you will be getting that early next week. All right, so who am I? Who's this crazy woman who's been talking to you? I'm Chelsea Paulson. I am the Chief Strategy Officer at Keystone Group International. My background is in human resources. I have 15 years of HR experience. And so my passion areas is around culture and people. And so I'm able to utilize that in what I do at Keystone, and really combine that and intersect that with business strategy as well. And so I've really been enjoying that. So I'm moderating our session for today. Today's focus is about attracting superstars, retaining our superstars, and really helping to maximize their superpowers. This is a new webinar series that we're starting. It's going to be quarterly with a focus on rebooting your culture. So culture, what we've all seen in the last 2 years, has become a really hot topic. And a lot of organizations believe that the pandemic and working remote has really hindered and hurt their culture, when in reality, their culture was hurting beforehand. The pandemic just made it a lot more obvious, and those cracks became crevices. And so we're really attacking this from a holistic perspective. Alec, who is the CEO of and visionary of Vision Spark, is going to really bring us in from the beginning. So when we're recruiting, when we're hiring people, making sure that we're hiring for cultural alignment, hiring for right people, right seats. And then Jamie, the visionary and CEO and founder of Keystone Group, is going to talk to us about the cultural aspect of that, and really, again, that intersection of culture and business strategy and leadership, and how those three all play together to really retain our superstars and really maximize their superpowers. So Jamie, hand it over to you just real quick for a quick introduction on your background, and then Alec will pass it over to you for a quick introduction.
Yeah, thanks, Chelsea. Glad to be having this conversation, and that's an understatement, because these are the types of conversations that leaders need to be having right now. And so I'm super excited to be driving this and want to hear all of the questions as we get through some of our content. My background is in big corporate. So I was at one of the largest privately held corporations on the planet for 13 years. That's really where I started my career. And so I got to really see the people component at work in really large enterprise transformation work. And so that's why I value so much what Vision Spark does in getting the right people onto the team, because as a leader in a large corporate environment, we could not be successful without the right people, right, on the bus and doing that. And so when I started Keystone 8.5 years ago, the goal was to take a lot of that same experience that I had and scale it for the small and mid-market. They don't have that same amount of services necessarily, and bringing some of these conversations to all of you. And so I'm really excited to be here again, to have this conversation and to be partnering with Vision Spark, who are the best at what they do.
Awesome. And Alec, how about you?
Yeah, I'm passionate about culture and hiring great people. Peter Drucker said, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." It is so true. Culture is everything, especially in this day and age. So I've been a visionary of Vision Spark. I've owned it for 10 years now. So we're celebrating our 10th anniversary this year, and super excited about that. Prior to that, I had a mailing and fulfillment company where we processed lots of mail for big companies here in Columbus, like Chase Mortgage and all the hospitals in town. And through that time, I met a lot of other business owners in a peer group, and we were all struggling with hiring and attracting talent and people issues. And I'm like, they didn't teach me this when I was getting my MBA. And so there was some seeds planted, and I'm like, I got to do something about this. So I started Vision Spark with a passion to help entrepreneurial companies get the right people in the right seats.
Perfect. And what a great start. So we want this to be very conversational and interactive. So as we're going throughout, if you have questions as either Alec or Jamie are talking, please feel free to put those into the chat and we'll get those answered as we go. We, of course, will leave time at the end as well, but we want to be able to answer these questions real time as they're popping up into your mind, so you don't forget about them. So Alec's going to start us off here, really talking about how to attract candidates that fit in and align with your culture. And then how do you go about interviewing and actually hiring for core values? So Alec, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, so when you want to attract great people to fit your culture, you got to include that in your job posting, your job description. So you want to include your culture and core values in your posting. A really good litmus test to know if you're doing this right is you're going to have candidates that say, I wasn't even looking, but I read your posting. This is me. I want to work for you. So if that's not happening, there's something off in your job posting. So make sure you're including core values, a description of your culture. This is going to attract individuals that want to be a part of it, and it's also going to repel individuals that don't want to be a part of it. The slide to the right there, that's an image of a door, and so we want to be uncompromising in evaluating candidates. We don't want to let candidates through that door that don't have our core values and are not going to fit in our culture. So a 10-minute interview, falling in love with the resume does not cut it. It does not cut it. Right? So we want to have several rounds of interviews, use a really high quality personality assessment that can really tell you who they are at the core. And so when they're there for 90 days, you're not saying, man, this isn't the person I interviewed. You're going to know exactly who they are. So be tenacious in vetting your talent.
Alec, I'm going to pause you there real quick.
Yeah.
We have a question, and before you move on to the next section, is what would it sound like if you were to include your core values and culture in a job posting online somewhere? What does that look like? What does that sound like in an ad?
Yeah, so real quickly, you would want a section called why. Why should you come work here? And you would describe you would put your core values and describe your culture. And you have to sell your organization. Why should they come work for you versus something across the street or your competitor, right? Because I have found that 90% of our clients, candidates want to work for them, and they read these job postings and they're like, sounds like everything else. But when you have a good job posting, man, this is a great culture.
And I was going to add too, so we're going to get to the culture work that we do, but we have a culture vision statement that we require the companies, right? That's where we started. What do you want your culture to be? What do you declare it to be? But also, what are you working for it to be? And I think having some of that in there can be really powerful for people as well.
Yeah.
Great question.
That's great, Jamie. So when you're interviewing, you want to be super attentive to listening for specific examples. So let's say one of your core values is customer service. You guys believe in the customer. You want to create raving fans. So you would ask a question like this. Tell me about a time when you went above and beyond the call of duty to create a raving fan. Okay, so that's a good question to ask. It starts with the expression, tell me about a time. So you're soliciting examples. And then you want to listen carefully specific. So if the candidate says, well, it really comes down to communication and problem solving. That's not a specific example. You want them to say something like, well, let me tell you what happened last week. Our biggest client had an issue with their order. And I did X, Y, and Z, and you go on to specific examples with that. So that is a much better representation. So examples add credibility to that individual. So that's how you interview for core values. I would encourage you to make a list of your core values and what's important about your culture and come up with several tell me about a time when type questions. The last image here. So when is it a good time to fire a bad fit employee? So think about it. Our stance here at Vision Spark, the best time to fire a bad fit employee is during the interview process. Don't even let them in the door. And it's going to save you time and money and heartache later. All right, so any other questions on it, Chelsea? You can go to the next slide.
Nope, no other questions have came in yet.
All right, so here are 4 things to remember when attracting top candidates. 1, a really good position profile. You want them to say, man, I wasn't even looking, but I read your posting. So that's the litmus test. You want to market that. So market it through job boards, networks, social media, have it on your email signature, talk to your friends about the openings that you have in your company. You want to make sure the compensation is commensurate with qualifications. So what does that mean? You don't want to have, let's say it's an $80,000 position, it's a leadership position, and you're asking for an MBA, bilingual, they live in Eastern Iowa, they have 20 years experience, they have C+ program, right? That's a purple squirrel. So you got to make sure the compensation is commensurate with the qualifications. I would encourage you to offer above market wages because an A player is usually 2 to 3 times more productive than a B player. You'll get your money's worth. And number 4 is to have a strong culture. So Jamie's going to talk more about this later, but having a great culture with leaders who value people is going to go a long way with attracting top candidates.
I just want to plug in on the leadership side there. What we have found over the years, but really over the last 2 years, is that the leaders make every difference with hiring, with retaining people, with building the culture.
Yes.
So it's, I mean, that leadership focus, we need to make, especially if you're talking bad fit, right? Yeah. If we have bad fit with the leaders, they need to be dealt with right away. And if you're hiring for leaders, that right fit and align with the culture is even more important.
Yeah, and what I love to say there is you can teach what you know, but you replicate who you are, right? So you can teach about the great culture, you can preach your core values all day long, but if the leaders in your organization are not setting examples and they're not ambassadors for your culture, you're not going to have a great culture.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. All right. So I want to shift their thinking real quick. We're not going to talk about culture. We're not going to talk about hiring right now. We're talking about marketing and branding. So on the left axis, you have product quality, and the bottom you have branding and marketing. So if you look at Apple computers, they have great quality, right? Their iPads and iMacs and AirPods and MacBook Pros, amazing. Their packaging is amazing, and they have great branding, right? So everyone's ever heard of Apple. They have a $2.7 trillion market capitalization. They've tripled in value since 2018, which is crazy. So they have a great brand, great quality. There's an organization, there's thousands of them, but I just picked one called Pure Essential Vitamins. Great quality product, but you probably never heard of them because they don't have great branding, great marketing. To the right there, you have Pontiac Computers. They're out of business now, but when they were in business, they had really good marketing, but their quality wasn't good. And then there's Bob's Pizza. Bob, he's down the street. He doesn't have great pizza. He waits all day for someone to come by to buy his pizza, and they don't come back. He doesn't do any marketing, right? So that's Bob's Pizza. So if we can shift now to talk about quality of our environment, which is our culture. Our culture is the byproduct of our business, and also talk about branding. So where Apple was before, companies that have high culture can really attract talent, and they have high retention, right? If you have great culture, but you're having trouble attracting talent, you probably need to increase your employer brand. So those of you that are in the HR seat, you may be saying, well, are you telling me that I can get help from the marketing department? Yes, this is a marketing issue. Okay, so increase your brand, your advertising on who you are as a company. The bottom right, you don't have great culture and you have great branding, you're going to have lots of turnover. Your turnover costs are going to be through the roof. You don't see it on the balance sheet, but for every employee, multiply their annual salary by 3, and that's what it's costing you. And then the last one, I put abandonship with the question mark. You don't have great culture, and you don't have great branding. It's not time to abandon ship, but you got to get your act together pretty soon and start investing in your culture. Keystone Group is a great organization to partner with in terms of helping you increase your culture. So any questions on these slides before I turn it over to Jamie?
I'll let people, if they have any questions, type those in. I have just one comment. You had mentioned about HR and marketing partnering up as far as recruiting is concerned. And this is something that I've been really talking a lot with HR leaders about. I run some HR cohort groups, and this has been a strong focus of strong organizations, is that they're really focusing on tying together our recruiting efforts with our marketing efforts and making sure that we are being very people focused, culture focused with our marketing on social and other places, so that it becomes a recruiting tool for us and not just a sales tool to sell our products or services. So that certainly is a best practice in today's environment with the difficulties we have in recruiting and in trying to find top candidates. So we have seen that quite a bit.
For sure. And companies that take this to really heart, their website has nothing to do with what they do. It's all about recruiting. And it's beautifully done. It's like, come work for us. This is what our environment is. This is what our culture is. It doesn't say anything about what they do. But they get clients because they're like, I want to work for this company who treats their employees so well.
Yeah.
So there are companies that do that very well, and they don't have the struggles that a lot of us do that don't have great marketing.
Yeah.
And when we get to the culture model, you'll see this, but we talk about like that idea of employment brand, and you would be shocked at the number of HR leaders when we ask, and you can see employment brands at the top of this model. When we ask, do you have, what's your employment brand? And they say, we don't have one. Yes, you do. And the fact that you say you don't have one is probably your biggest concern, right? It means you're not proactively managing it. And I think that's a really important thing for everyone to leave here, to make sure you're actively managing your employment brand.
Jamie, we did have 2 questions pop up here. I'm just going to pause you there. So one comment was 3 times the salary cost. Where can I read that study?
There are lots of studies on what it costs for a poor performer, someone that walks in the door. So the lowest I found for the least paid employee in an organization, the lowest cost I've ever found is $7,000. So just having them walk in the door and walk out, $7,000. That's recruiting time, advertising, all that stuff. Most people can agree it's 3 times their salary. So it's, you think about, you know, branding it, lost in customer morale, other employees leaving, you know, it's 3 times. Brad Smart, the author of Top Grading, did a study, and he found that for an executive, the cost of a mishire is 14 times their annual salary. So, you know, $100,000 employee could be a $1.4 million mistake to an organization.
And we talk a lot about, and something that I was just Googling it, like what are the exact words to answer that? And we can find that for you, John. But employment turnover, direct and indirect costs, because that's what most organizations don't understand. The direct costs are the costs of like, okay, we have to recruit again, we've got to do the posting again, like all of those. The indirect costs are the impacts to your culture, or the impacts to people when you have to get rid of somebody, that falls on other people in the organization. There's a lot of indirect costs that most organizations do not factor in. And that's really what Alex says, that's what we hear is 2.5 to 3 times their salary is what it really takes. So even more reason to take his advice and fire them in the interview process. I love that. And I'm going to steal that because it's just a great concept. That's when we want to weed them out, not because they're not great people, but because they don't contribute to our culture. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about next. So this is Keystone's, what we call our culture strategy intersect model, and a little bit of background on this model. It was, and we'll send these slides out. We actually have this on our website as a downloadable that you can download with your team with some questions. So we give the model away. And the idea behind this in 2018, when I created it, is I created it out of sheer frustration. Frustration that there were so many business leaders, HR professionals that were like, I know we need to care about this, but we've got all these strategic things we need to work on. So culture's kind of over here, right? It was a second thought. And what we wanted to share with them, and the past 2 years have only catapulted this forward, is that your culture and your strategy, one does not eat one for breakfast. Like they're literally at the table together. You can no longer manage them separately. And that's why we titled the model the way we did. And what we've tried to do here is really break down the complexity and the nebulous factor of culture into what we call building blocks that are all important. And so you see employment brand on there. You see things like fun and collaboration, and then you see the foundational items that are built on conscious leadership, which we've talked about. And the idea with this is that no one of these is more or less important or more or less impactful in your organization. They're all tied together. So a lot of organizations struggle because they are, for example, a really fun culture. Right? We go to the baseball games together. We have the team barbecues and we do all of these fun things. But if accountability is lacking in our organization and all of the work gets piled on a small amount of people and other people aren't held accountable, it doesn't matter how many barbecues or baseball games you're going to go to, you're still not going to have that strong culture. Right? At the same time, we could really be good at developing our people, right? Investing in those emerging leaders, sending them to training, really investing in them to grow. But if that emerging leader comes in every day and does not have trust with the person that they report to, they're not going to stay. And so when we talk about the complexity of culture, it's complex, but it can also be broken down into different pieces. And that's really what hiring and making sure you get the right people that contribute in the right way to this culture, because one wrong hire, and I know you guys have seen this, one wrong hire can set you back. And Chelsea actually has a story around this too, even at the top of an organization, how it took them back 3 years that they had to rebuild a culture after she hired the wrong leader.
Well, and Alec, you talked about if it's the higher the level of the leader, the higher the dollar amount that they can impact. We saw that firsthand. Significant numbers that impacted the organization from a financial and profitability standpoint, from a culture standpoint, from an accountability, from a trust, from all of these things we're talking about, clarity of vision, purpose. I mean, all of these things was impacted by hiring and holding on to, not firing soon enough, the right leader.
And
we see it too.
And the most important thing, back to that culture vision, is understanding that your organization has its own culture vision, just like it has its own values that are different than your competition, that are different than the business down the street. And so it's getting really clear on who we are. And as Keystone, we talk about maximizing your superpowers as an organization. And I want to talk about that for a moment because there's a lot of information right now where you're hearing about we call superpowers. It's just an amped up strength. So I'll talk a little bit about what that means, but we're hearing that that's one of the number one reasons people are leaving right now is an inability to use their strengths every day at work. How much simpler can it be? This isn't a big price tag. It's conscious leaders getting the most out of their people, understanding where their strengths are at and figuring out how to leverage them to drive the power of the organization. And so that's where the leadership aspect really comes in. And so when we talk to leaders about helping their people find their superpowers, it's really helping them understand the difference between a talent. A talent is something that's kind of core to who we are, right? Some of it is in your personality, introvert, extrovert, some of it athletic talent. I do believe some people are born with that, things like that. A strength is something that you think about like a muscle, right? If you use that muscle over and over again, eventually it becomes stronger. So you can overcome a lack of talent in certain areas by strengthening that talent, right? And making it stronger. But a superpower is on a whole nother level. And so when we can tap into the superpower of the people in our organization, it's taking their God-given talents, what they really are truly good at, what they love working at, because when you're good at something, it actually doesn't feel like work. And when you can help them find that, that's really where we help them find their why. We help them drive to the core of who they are and how they fit in the organization. And that's what makes them sticky. That's what makes them want to stay in an organization. Truly, we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but that's the sense of belonging, is when somebody can feel like they have that purpose in the organization and they're at the right place. Now, this isn't something that's done overnight, but conscious leaders are focused on this. We have an entire Conscious Leader Academy just around how to help leaders understand that this is their number one job, right? Is to get the most and maximize the people in their organization.
Well, and what we've seen too, time and time again, and I'm guilty of this from my HR days as well, is that we often promote leaders into leadership positions because they were the best technician, they were the best coder, they were the best salesperson. And so we promoted them into leadership without really evaluating if they were going to be good leaders. And then we don't do enough to train them to set expectations of what does it mean to be a leader and what is the magnitude of this role that you're in right now. And we're doing them a disservice and us a disservice. And so helping leaders understand what is your role as a leader. And one of them, your role as a leader, so it's to lead people, is to help them understand what their superpowers are and then help them utilize those.
I read a statistic.
We have, oh, sorry, Jamie. Yeah, I was going to say, we have a really powerful leadership interview that the top candidates have to ace before they're even considered by our client. And one of the areas we evaluate is delegation. And so we ask them questions around delegation, and what we're looking for is great leaders delegate based on strengths and interest. And you'd be surprised as to how many people don't get that question correct.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Others would be surprised. We wouldn't, because we see it all the time. I mean, and that's really why we're talking about these things, is to bring this forward. But I love that you're interviewing on that early on. One other thing is, I read a statistic that they've done like studies on employee productivity, and this was even pre-COVID, right? Where we're all remote, is we get about 40% of what people are capable of. The average employee gives us 40%. And what that means is not like they're showing up every day saying, I'm going to stick it to these guys and only give them 40% of what I can actually do. It's actually the opposite. It's that they don't even know what they're capable of. And leaders are not drawing out their superpowers and saying, you know what, I know this is your seat on the bus and you're in this organization, but we could really use your help on this big customer issue over here because you've got this strength, or on this big project that we're trying to implement. We've almost become too hierarchical in how we look at the structure and the people that we have in our organization. And I think we need to break ourselves of that a little bit and look more at their superpowers and their strengths and how we can leverage that.
Yeah, we had a really good question come in here from Stephen. His question is, in a culture of now, today's culture overall, how do we sell a long-term culture and mentorship plan or a vision that hasn't actually come into fruition, right? It hasn't actually manifested itself yet in the organization.
I think the biggest piece is the culture vision, right? Is being able to articulate what the vision and what you're working towards. And we see this all the time, and we're not going to talk through our process, but Stephen, happy to have a call to talk through actually how we implement that culture model, is that we put a 2 to 3 year roadmap, depending on the client, together. And that really helps them say, we can't do it all in year one. And actually the clients that try to fix all their culture issues in year one, we're typically telling them to pump the brakes and pick 3, because it's not going to feel authentic. And employees have to believe you, right? That you really want to focus and we want to get better here, and then we're going to move on. But by putting that roadmap together, it's showing them that even if the thing maybe that they think is most broken is in year 2, you've still got it on the roadmap. You're aware of it. That's half the battle. And so I think putting that vision together and putting that culture roadmap together, which is always evolving, can do a ton for engagement and to really tell your people that you are committed to it. And then it has to be built into your strategy. So whether you do formal strategic planning, they have to see the culture and people aspects on your strategic plan for them to believe you that you're really committed to it.
Great. Alec, do you have anything to add to that?
No, that's awesome. I visionaries need to be really clear in their vision and the culture they want. Like, this is where we're going,
Yes.
and this is the behaviors we want. This is the culture we want, and it gives people to self-select out if they don't want to be a part of that. But also, it could be a great attraction tool. Like, I would love to be part of this culture, and I went through if we have time at the end, I'd be happy to share a personal example of how I needed a new vision because we hit our goals, we surpassed our goals, and so it was a great opportunity for me to do some developing as a visionary.
Yeah, perfect. So I think to answer your question, Stephen, the short answer is have a vision first, make sure it's clear and communicated, and then what's our plan to get there? And if you can articulate both of those and then show continuous progress along the way, that should be enough to get people to stick and want to stay in the organization. Just having a vision isn't enough. You got to show some progress and communicate it, right? Communication is the #1 issue that we see in organizations when talking about culture. And so the more frequently we can communicate, here's our vision, here's our plan, here's what we've done, here's what we're working on, I think the more people are going to believe it and then want to stick with the organization.
Right. And if Chelsea, you want to flip to the structure slide, we'll just briefly talk about is when we talk about structure, we're really talking about getting clear. And so it seems strange that this would tie back to culture. But again, clarity is what most people are looking for, and how they come in every day, how they do what they're supposed to do, where it does the accountability sit for all of these different roles, and how can they build trust with each other? Because when accountability is not clear, I'm guessing some of you in your organizations deal with this, because a lot of organizations do, is when it's not clear, it's a trust issue, right? We are constantly every day in the work we're trying to do, and we're trying to do good work, but we're breaking down trust the whole way because we don't know where the lines are. And so building out that structure, but building it in a way of accountability, and Chelsea, I'm going to go to the next slide, is really getting clear on what people are accountable for. Every seat on the bus, right? Whether they've been there for 3 months or 3 years or 30 years, is constantly evolving as the business is evolving. The structure that worked for us 3 years ago, and Alec, I'm sure you guys see this, is not the one that's going to work to get us through the next 3 years. And most organizations hang on to a lot of the same roles, a lot of the same titles, and they don't ever refresh the accountabilities to say, we're a whole different level and customer support needs to look different than it did 3 years ago. And what happens is we still have people that are coming in every day trying to do their best, but we're expecting something different than them. Mm-hmm. And I just had this issue last week, but we say this all the time, is we say clear is kind. Right? It's really hard to have the conversations when someone's not performing the way you want them to. But typically when we get together with an executive team, they'll be frustrated and talking about a person, or, we just can't get them to perform. And my first question to them, after I let them kind of have their, get their frustrations out, is, would that person be shocked right now that we're talking about them? And you wouldn't believe how many leaders sit back and say, yeah, they'd probably be surprised. And if they're going to be surprised, then we have not done our jobs, right? That's really what that question is meant to reflect back, because we owe it to the people the humans under our care, right, as conscious leaders, to be clear on what these accountabilities are. And if they were hired in one role and the role evolved, we've got to make sure that we're having those conversations. So I just think this is such a crucial piece to culture breakdown right now that most organizations need to work through. Alec, do you guys see this?
I just want to echo what you have on the slide as to what to obsess about each day. What a clarifying question in building job postings. I'm gonna steal that, Jamie.
Steal away.
Well, and that's just it. It's not the 200 things that you do, because
No.
sure, there might be 200 things that you do, but what do you do every single day that you need to wake up and obsess about and say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this awesome, right? And be crystal clear for each individual what I'm supposed to do. And then when you can post it on a chart and say, and here's what everyone else is supposed to be doing, it just creates that alignment, clarity, makes collaboration a lot easier, ownership and accountability a lot easier when we're able to do that.
And
I
with
wanted-
the job postings, if you can be less is more. So if you put down 27 things you're responsible for, it's actually going to repel potential talent, because they're like, well, this company's not focused.
Right.
I'm going to be a jack of all trades. Maybe I'll come work there a little bit and then I'll look for another job because this company's not clear. So yeah, less is more.
In my recommendation for job postings, and Alec, maybe this is not good, but what I've been telling people is put those 5 or 6 accountabilities on the job posting,
Yes,
maybe a couple of sub bullets beneath them, but that's really it, right? Like this is the majority of what you're going to be doing. So if you can do this, then great. If you can't do some of these other tertiary things, then okay, we'll get someone else to do it, or we'll teach you to do it, or whatever, but this is what you have to be able to do. So just put that on there.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Robin's question, and I don't know to what slide, we might have been flipping through slides. What type and how often do you see company leaders communicate this information? Robin, if you're talking about accountabilities and those pieces, at a minimum once a year, we should be refreshing the accountabilities in the organization to align to the business model, right? Has the business evolved? Do we need different seats on the bus? If you do, you call Alec and team. But it's really assessing that and saying, do we know, right? Are we running the business in the right way with the right people in the right seats? Which is actually the next slide here, is making sure once you bring people in, you've got to constantly assess them. And I don't mean assess by your performance review process. That is a piece. I actually mean more frequently than that, right? You have to be having that conversation to say, where are you at? And where do we see you going, or where do we need improvement? It doesn't mean we're going to get rid of you. It doesn't mean you're not a valuable member of the team. But again, if we're not having those expectation setting conversations, we're not treating the humans in our care the right way. That's truly what we believe.
We had another question from another Robin come in on how they've started including accountabilities in their employees' offer letters, and questioning, is this wise? What are the pros and cons of including accountabilities in employee offer letters?
I think it's wise. I would, every state in the country has different laws. So I would just run it by a really good employment law attorney. But I think it's very clear, like this is what you're going to be held accountable to. Like Jamie said, clear is kind, and employees want to know how they're going to be held accountable. How are you going to measure my performance? So I think that's a great idea. I've seen it done a couple of times, but yeah, I would say keep it up.
Yeah, I love it, Robin. I will steal that and give it to other clients. I think it's a great idea. And again, what it does is it drives the conversation early on to say, back to the superpowers, is how do you feel like your strengths will allow you to tackle these accountabilities, right? And really manage these accountabilities. And you just want to have that open dialogue with people so they really understand. Chelsea, if you want to flip to the invite challenge matrix, this is kind of the last tool. And I know we're showing you guys a bunch of tools. You're going to have all of these slides, and we're happy to have a conversation. But this one's a really important one as leaders, the leaders that are on this call, the leaders back in your organization that are not on this call. I want each of you for a moment to think about someone in your life that, when I say who has been the biggest coach or mentor for you throughout your life. It can be your 4th grade basketball coach, or it can be a boss you have right now. There's no rules, but who is that person for you? And when we ask that question to leaders, 100% of the time, they can think of someone that has had an impact on their life in some way. And the reason that that person pops into their head is that they invited them, which really means they gave them their time. They gave them their wisdom, right? They helped to give them the guidance that they needed at that point in their career or in their life. They invited them. They gave them their resource of time and wisdom, but they also challenged them, right? And challenge really means to push you beyond what you think you're capable of, which is what any good leader does. So what we see in organizations, and this really ties back to how we summarize some of the cultures that we come into when we're working with them, is that when you have a high invite culture, but you have a lower challenge culture, we call it a cozy culture. What that means is everybody really likes each other, right? We get along, there's really no drama, but we're not really pushing the boundaries of what we could be as a business, as a department, a division, or even as individuals. When you have a low invite environment and a low challenge environment, it's bored. People are just coming in every day. We've literally had people say, I work about 2 hours a day. They don't challenge me at all. My boss doesn't really talk to me. I mean, unfortunately, there are organizations like that. We're trying to help them one at a time. When you have low invite, but high challenge, you create a stressed environment. What this means is leaders aren't spending enough time with their people, but they're challenging the heck out of them. What we're ultimately trying to look for is that high performance quadrant where it's the right balance of invite and it's the right balance of challenge, where we're pushing them a little bit uncomfortable, but we're giving them what they need from us to support them. And here's the complicated thing. If you were to go and plot everybody in your team, in your organization, they would all plot somewhere differently, probably. And our job as leaders is to figure out how to get them to that high performance quadrant. And we have to do something different. For the cozy person, it's going to be giving them a project that's really going to push them this year. For the board person, we got to get a little closer to them and we've got to understand their strengths likely and how they can maximize them at work. For the stressed person, they're just screaming for leadership and for someone to help them solve the problems and get through what they're trying to get through. So this is a really important piece to assess your culture, because we typically find cultures fall into one of these 4 quadrants. And so that's something for you to take from here is, where does your culture fall?
And I would also say, where do you fall on this quadrant? As a leader, where would you plot yourself? And what do you need more of? And then to ask for that. And I think a lot of us think our high performers are in the high performing category, but a lot of times who we think our high performers are actually in that stressed category, because they're doing so good, they're getting things done. So we just keep giving them more, and they don't need our attention like some of our low performers do. And so we don't give them enough attention, conversation, one-on-ones to really check in and see how they're doing. And so those who we think are high performers might actually be in the stress category, could be doing so much more and be so much more productive if we were to give them some attention, focus on their superpowers, and help them utilize those on a regular basis. So you can be getting more out of people who you think are your top performers. So we want to transition. So Alec has a grid similar to this that he uses. And I'm an assessment junkie. And so I think you should use every assessment, well, not every, but pick some assessments, right? I mean, you don't just pick one and hang your hat on it. This invite challenge matrix is a great data point to plot yourself and to plot your team. But this also, and of course, these are free. Anyone can do these anytime. So here's another one that Alec uses that I really like.
Yeah, we're giving you a lot of 2x2s today. So this one was actually Jack Welch in the 80s came up with this, and it's you can research it. It's called the performance valuation matrix. So on the left you have your core values, and on the bottom you have your performance. So the top right are your stars. These are people that you want to clone. If you could clone them, you would do it all day long. In terms of attracting talent, this is who you want to hire. Keep in mind that if you want to hire stars, you got to have a great culture and you got to pay them for what they're worth. Puppies are individuals that they're maybe they're new to your organization, they have your core values. You're not getting the performance from them right now, but through good coaching and good accountability, you can turn them into stars. The bottom right are the enemies. Sometimes these are called terrorists, and these are individuals that could hold your organization hostage. They're super productive. They have such high performance, but they're not operating with your core values. And And so it's good to have a conversation with them or two to talk about how they are exemplifying their core values. It's a good opportunity to coach up or coach out. And the bottom one are rats. And this is intentional because rats are the opposite of stars. Okay, so rat is star backwards. Rats are individuals that don't have great core values and their performance is low. And what I have found is that visionaries don't know who the rats are in their organization. Because what happens when a visionary comes into a room with rats, they scurry, they act busy. And you know, it's just like you show a light in a room of rats, they're going to scurry. So how do you know who the rats are? One is spend some time with them, listen to them. If they are blaming other people, if they're kind of doing this, well, so-and-so does that, so-and-so does that. If they're super critical, that's one. Also, you want to hold them accountable. Rats do not like to be held accountable. Once you hold them accountable, they'll probably self-select out. So take, after our workshop, take a minute and plot your direct reports as to who you think are on here. And then also use this in terms of a hiring tool. Am I hiring an enemy? Man, this resume is great, but boy, have they had a lot of jobs in the last few years. So am I hiring an enemy? So maybe they're a puppy. Oh, I love this person. They have so much potential. They have so much talent. And by coming to my organization with a great culture, we can coach them into a star. So use this as a hiring tool.
Perfect. And we had a great question again from Stephen come in. And he asked, when you mentioned pulling the superhero or the star out of an employee who isn't slated for responsibility, but they're willing and able, what are some ways that we can compensate these one-off superhero actions?
That's a good question. So, so if they have a star in the organization, how do they compensate the star? Is that, or if they have some additional responsibility?
I think this is kind of getting at, and Stephen, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's getting at the, like, pull somebody that's got a superpower from here and put them on a project over here. And so I'll maybe let you guys talk about the compensation, but the value of doing that is we're pushing most of our clients right now to do cross-functional projects, right? Not just by department, but really drive the cross-functional projects and bring different people in who don't normally work together to solve that problem, the customer problem or the big project. And then we're seeing some clients where there are bonuses given for those projects, right? If they hit a certain date, if they deliver in a certain way, they're usually one-time discretionary bonuses to say thank you for doing this, because they're not really giving up their day job to do it. But those people typically are your emerging leaders and the people that you want to watch for a next leadership position in the organization if they're willing to do that.
Yeah, and I would recommend incentivizing your employees for the behaviors that you want. So, a very simple profit sharing plan or an incentive-based plan can go a long way. And so they're committed to that project because they know it's going to impact the bottom line. And in 90 days, they may have a little bonus. So that could be a topic for another day in terms of compensation, but a very simple profit sharing plan can go a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. We had more of a comment in here than a question, but I think it's worth stating. So if you put accountabilities into the offer letter, back to that question, John is questioning the legal ability to then change the work as things go along. So his thought is that during orientation, performance reviews are better times for that. And this is where, like Alec has said, I'd pass it by a legal attorney. Like in there, you of course should say these responsibilities can change at any time and so forth. Like as the initial job function, like here's what it is, but these can change at any time. So you always want to have a disclaimer in there as well and get legal advice.
Yeah, I think John's spot on there. So he's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Keep asking questions. We just got a couple last things left here. So if you have other questions, please submit them into the chat.
Yeah, and I guess what we want to leave with you here is that the biggest piece, and this is actually built, this is the 5 dysfunctions of a team. We use this with all clients. Some of you may be familiar with this, but it's really the idea that by focusing on trust and positive conflict and driving commitment and accountability with your team, you will get the results. What most organizations do is they focus on the results and they try to manage everything else down. And so we're really saying to go from a good company who can get results, right, who can cross a finish line, to become a great company. It's not really about the finish line. It's about how you get to the finish line. That's the difference. Good and great companies can both cross that same finish line. It's how you get there, right? Is your team trust being built? Does your team want to run a race again together, right? Do they feel stronger at the end of it, or have we deteriorated trust in just to get to the finish line? And so it's everything we've talked about today is really fine tuning. Most of your organizations aren't horrible places, but what we have to focus on is that constant fine tuning of our culture and our people to keep us in that great category, right? To constantly strive for that.
Perfect. Okay, so we are open for questions here. And the last thought we kind of want to leave you with is that if you're attracting superstars, so you have a solid hiring process where you're hiring with your core values and those key accountabilities in mind, getting the right people into the organization, getting those stars and those high performers and not the rats and the puppies. And then really focusing on retaining your superstars by making sure our leaders are prepared and expectations are set so they understand what their role is as a leader, and that we are really focusing on understanding and utilizing the superpowers within each of our individuals. That's what's going to create superpower performance for individuals, for teams, for organizations. And that's really what's going to get us to that next level. So again, please enter in any questions that come in. I might have a couple here for you guys. Also, as we are waiting for questions to come in, just to save the date, the next Culture Reboot webinar is going to be on June 1st at 1 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Eastern. So mark that on your calendar. Let's see, another question from John. Most companies can't afford all stars. Is there a report of dollar of value to culture?
Yeah, Chelsea, I don't know if you can put the performance valuation matrix up with the stars and puppies again, but you're right, John, that it is costly to hire stars. I do think they're worth it. They're 2 to 3 times productive. So you're playing the long game with hiring stars. Where we have found is that most organizations can get a much better ROI from hiring puppies, so to speak. So these are individuals that have potential to perform, so they can afford them. The smaller the companies, you have to be less particular on the qualifications, their background, and all that. But great ROI is when you hire individuals that have good core values. You do need a good culture, and you do need to hold them accountable and coach them up. But you're going to get some good return on your investment.
Well, they often say that top performers can do the work of 3 poor performers. So one top performer's salary is going to be less than 3 low performers' salary.
Yes. I used to ask that question. I used to speak around the country for Vistage, and I would ask, how much more productive are your A players in your organization compared to your B players? And the lowest I got was 2, but I had a couple of times I said I had 100, that 100 times more productive. And Steve Jobs said that a small group of A+ players can run circles around large groups of B and C players.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, it's not just about the individual, it's about then putting them in a team, in a collaborative, high trust environment so that they can execute on whatever the goals and vision of the organization are. So that's individuals, but then it's also about having a high performing team. Let's see, Stephen has another question in here. We run on the EOS system and are starting to use Will Scott's Culture Fix book program. The EOS system has been very game changing in our company, and the Culture Fix lays out a really good game plan for implementing core values in culture. Just a comment, this has been great. Thank you all.
And I think that's great. And what you're really talking about is having the operating framework, which there's EOS is one, Pinnacle. There's a lot of great frameworks for how you run the business, for accountability and different things like that. But what they're not going to necessarily tackle is they're not going to tackle the culture piece. So layering that together is exactly the culture strategy intersect that we talked about. So Stephen, I think that's great.
Yeah, and really operationalizing your core values. It's one thing to say, here's our core values and post them up on a wall. But if people aren't actually living those out, if the leaders aren't living those values, if you're not hiring off of them, if you're not keeping your people and promoting your people off of these values, and you can't walk down the hall and ask anyone what our core values are and they can't name them, then you're not actually utilizing your core values to the highest level that you possibly could to get the most out of them. So I think I'm assuming that's a lot of what that book is talking about and helping you with. I wanted to go back real quick to Robin's question when she asked about how often do you communicate this, because she might have been asking about culture and the culture vision and strategy when we talked about that. And so I just want to touch back on that. And our best practice for that is quarterly. You talk about your culture strategy every time you're talking about your business strategy. So we've talked about these business operating systems, frameworks for your businesses. Most of those are going to say, have a quarterly conversation with your leadership team, with your organization, kind of an all hands meeting to talk about where we at, what did we do last quarter, what are we doing next quarter. And this is where that intersect of business strategy and culture strategy, they need to be hand in hand, and talking about your culture strategy at the same time you're talking about your business strategy.
And don't, one thing, we've shared a lot of information with you guys today, and one thing we don't want is to get overwhelmed. So the answer to a good culture is to start, to do something different than you did yesterday, to have a conversation as a leadership team about where is our culture? What is our vision? What do we want it to be? Because what we can't do is control culture as leaders, because the culture is all of the people that are in the organization. But what we can do is choose how we impact it. And so I'd love to just share our simplified version of what a positive culture actually means. It's a place where people come in every day better, or they leave every day better than when they came in. Day in and day out, are we bringing people in, filling their bucket, challenging them, supporting them, and sending them home in a positive way? Or are we bringing them in high energy, depleting them all day long, and sending them home to their families in that way? Right? That's as simple as it gets. And that shows up in a million different ways in organizations. You just have to define what that looks like for your organization, right? Don't overcomplicate it, but do take a step towards this, because culture will be the competitive advantage of the future.
Well, and I'd like to just, unless there's any other questions, please submit them in. But just kind of my last question for you guys, because I'm sure a lot of listeners are thinking, where do I start? How do I get started with making sure I'm hiring the right people for the right seat? How do I get started with, retaining my superstars and making sure that we understand who they are and making sure they're utilizing their superpowers? So Alec, I'll start with you. If it's kind of if you would leave people with one thought or one place to start, what would it be?
The one thought would be to make sure you put your core values and culture in your job postings. That's number one, and hire accordingly. We say around here, hire for the who, right? So their behaviors and how they match. So that's my one takeaway.
And mine is to have a discussion around your culture vision. Whether you are in a large organization and it's just your department and your people, that's fine too. Even if you can't control the culture at the top, have that conversation. What do you want it to be? What do you want it to feel like, right? And start describing that, because just that conversation alone with your team will go a long ways in them feeling like you value culture and that you want to be part of making it better.
Awesome. All right, I don't see any other questions coming in. So Alec and Jamie, thank you so much for being our panelists today on our Culture Reboot. Again, don't forget to mark your calendars for June 1st for our next Culture Reboot webinar. We'll be doing these quarterly throughout the year and coming back with some more hot topics on June 1st. So thank you all for attending. And again, we'll be sending this out, so you'll get this recording in the next few days so you can share it with others. And please reach out if you have any questions. Reach out to Jamie, reach out to Alec, reach out to myself. Happy to connect with you on any of the content we talked about today. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.